Welcome to another episode of NBM Talks, a series of the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab, where we speak with individuals who are working at the intersection of literature, medicine, and health. Our guests are writers, clinicians, scholars, artists, and advocates who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the field. Together we discuss how we can engage with narrative-based medicine principles and practices in creative and diverse ways. We hope you enjoy this episode.
We're here with Paula Holmes-Rodman, who is an ethnographer, a caregiver, a writer, an advocate, and is here in Toronto briefly visiting. And we're really lucky to have Paula in the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab studio with us to talk a little bit more about her work in narrative-based medicine. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. A little bit on the cold side, but great to be here. So thank you.
So can you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself? Whatever you think sort of is relevant for your work now in writing and advocacy and narrative-based medicine. A little bit about your professional background and just how you come to this.
Sure. I kind of think now, looking back at my career, that I was probably into narrative medicine before I knew what it was called. So my PhD is in the anthropology of religion, and I was interested in miracle stories. And I did a lot of saint chasing in the American Southwest and asking people about miracle stories, which actually are medical narratives for the most part. With Indigenous women, the Apache, Navajo, and Mescalero Apache, Navajo, and a lot of the Pueblo peoples in and around Albuquerque, and in the Four Corners area, and asking about how those medical narratives define themselves as Indigenous women in a sort of post-colonial identity, both as what they called traditional people and as Catholic women. And so I was sort of doing a lot of saint chasing and a lot of finding out how the first Indigenous saint came to be in the Catholic Church. So that was my PhD work, both with a foot in both anthropology and in religious studies. And then I did a postdoc work sort of following along the same thing. And then I had my own illness experience, which when I think about it is sort of a big blank space. Have not written into that space yet. It remains a blank page. And then sort of narrative medicine came to town via the caregiving train. I was my mother's caregiver, and she had a medically assisted death, and I was her person, as they say, and felt that was a worthy task to do, to accompany her on that journey, and that she had medically assisted death, and I was there, and that was a good thing. Then my sister, Lindsay, who's autistic, was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer just after that, months after my mom died. So I became her caregiver, her person, immediately afterward. And that was 4 years ago. And in all that time, I started reaching out for autism-specific cancer resources. And it was actually a woman at Ovarian Cancer Canada who said, I got speaking with her, and she said, have you heard of narrative medicine? And I said, no, I don't know what that is. Haven't heard of it. And she told me, and I said, that's it. That's what I'm doing. That's me. I drank the Kool-Aid, I think, immediately before I'd even had a sip of it. And then found your program. And I felt that at first, I almost quit 5 times on the first day of the foundation program. I was reading, I think you had everybody writing their little blurbs about what their specialties were. And I thought, oh, for the love of God, I'm going to fail. I'm terrible at this. I don't belong. I don't belong here. I have nothing to say. And then I realized that, in fact, it is a truly interdisciplinary broad church, I think you said, Damien, at some point in time, and all are welcome here. And I love that about narrative medicine, and that, in fact, an ethnographic perspective, and even keeping that sort of religious studies eye on things has a lot to say, has a lot to contribute to this work. And the idea of sort of the parallel charting and has been very informative as the advocacy work has continued for my sister as her cancer journey. And Lord, I hate that term. The cancer experience has continued. So that has really spoken to me as well as that's continued.
Well, I want to ask you about everything.
Yes.
About all of that. Maybe, first of all, could you elaborate on how the narrative approaches have influenced you or been an aid to you, an exploration during the very intense and complex caregiving experiences that you've had?
Yeah, well, I read an article, and I wish I could remember where it was, with Rita Sharon, that she said that the sort of the pillars, the attention, affiliation, and representation, are in their essence, they're baked in advocacy work. When you start doing those things, when you start paying attention to patients in that way and affiliate with their experience and actually represent them, which is what I want to do with my sister's experience, that in fact, it seems like a very natural thing to do. And that you not only need to sort of say, okay, she needs this medical thing. She needs a social work consult here, but she has a story worth telling, that her life is worth telling, and her death is worth telling, her impending death is worth telling as well. But even some of the small practices that I've learned in both of your classes, the short writing, the very fast narrative prompts, turn your brain off and write. I still use that as a therapeutic task for myself, to allow myself to, because I'm an overthinker by nature. And these 4-minute prompts of just simply writing has allowed me to sort of go into, it's very sort of cathartic to go into spaces and allow myself to not have to worry about what it's going to be in the end, but to not only just live through this, but also write through this. So I would take the voice noting, wandering the hallways in the hospital and voice noting into my phone and just saying, gee, the acute neurosurgery unit is kind of like a haunted house. What does that mean? What does that look like? And it's rambling garbage right now, but it won't be in the end. But I don't need to worry. And so my academic brain says, well, I'm not going to write anything until it's good. But the narrative medicine approach, or maybe it's just your version of it, in which you just use writing as a tool, as a lens, and turning on the ethnographic eye, but with a writing lens. And even just, I spent Christmas in the hospice with my sister, which is a wild thing to do. It's also a really beautiful thing to do. It was like this very strange cruise. And just to turn on the narrative eye and to observe what was going on with all the people, all the characters, to see who was there, the family members, the staff members, not just myself and my sister as a patient. And to just write about, actually that turned out to be a ghost story too. The ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future showed up there. And to think about how one can write about it in a way that not only tells Lindsay's story, but my story as well. And I think that's interesting. When I first started with narrative medicine, I thought, okay, I'm here to tell Lindsay's story. I'm going to literally bracket myself and put myself in the margins, like physically in the margins. And now I'm thinking, maybe that's not what I want to do. Maybe I want to do some sort of sisterly, dual, multivocal thing. And I don't know quite what that looks like yet, but that's something I'm playing with as well. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I mean, just picking up on a lot of the threads that you're saying, you're bringing these eyes around being an ethnographer, paying attention, what's going on here, trying to bracket our own expectations, and assumptions, and bringing a writer's sensibility to it as well. I think, whether it be the notes that you're taking at 2:00 in the morning, in the unit, thinking I'm going to make something of this. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I'm going to do something creative to put this narrative together. And thinking about how you're writing yourself into that story feels really valuable to me and really interesting. It's not about writing only, in this case, my sister's story or trying to represent it, but it's like, what is the relationship between her story and my story as a sister, as a caregiver, as a witness to what she's experiencing? And it seems to me that's very rich, is to think about the relationship of those two, that decision to write yourself in more explicitly?
And I think there has been almost a parallel experience in anthropology as well. So the older anthropology was that the I, we had to leave it out of it. It's like, because we are the all-knowing I, and I'm coming to observe this primitive culture, and I will just simply explain this primitive culture. It doesn't matter who I am. My background is irrelevant because I'm basically a robot, right? And I'll just explain it, and then I'll present it to you, and then you will be able to understand what the fill in the blank so-called primitive culture is. Well, we don't do that anymore as anthropologists. So why the heck should we do it in narrative medicine? It doesn't make any sense to me. So even since I think I wrote what I was going to do in my project, I've changed it because it doesn't make any sense to me anymore. I literally cannot bracket myself out of this story. So, and I think because I wanted to take my sister, who she's not non-speaking, she does speak, but she's been very quiet, very clipped all her life. And only I want to make sure that her medical choices, her voice is really heard at any time now, as matters more than ever. And I thought in order to hear her voice, I had to quiet my own. But in fact, I've done these sort of these ethnographic interviews over the last 2.5 years on Zoom, and they're hilarious. We are so funny, I have to tell you. I think we're funny. We're talking about cancer and autism, and like there's cats and snacks and words to our sponsors, and we're so funny. And those are this lovely legacy memory. Like, I know after she's gone, I'm going to treasure those. But I thought, why should I just extract her words out of those and leave the relationship part? I really want to pay attention to that story creation encounter. And now when I'm looking at how can we bring narrative medicine into, for example, the new cancer center at Calgary, I realize that, well, it matters who's asking, who's doing the eliciting. You can't just sit down and say, well, tell me your cancer story. Bring it on. Because people don't just spew cancer stories. I hope, that relational ethics is incredibly important. You have to write that into the situation. It's worth thinking about anyways, about what is that context in which the storytelling is told, I think, as well.
Could you go into that a little more? Actually, both those things. If you could speak a little more about some of the people listening may not know the Mentored Advanced project that you're working on or working towards, but also we'd love to hear more about those practical, professional, clinical teaching activities that you're beginning to.
Sure. The Mentored Advanced, the MAP, the independent project, I sort of called it the solidarity storytelling. And really it started, I think, again, with an assignment, I think, for your part about what it is to bear witness versus bearing witness to an illness story. And I thought a lot about that versus an anthropologist, Ruth Bahar, that talked about leaving the conversation of making sure that it's recognizable to the person who's telling the story, and thought about playing on the ideas of bearing witness and bearing across. What does it mean to bear witness to an illness story? What does it mean to bear it across, to give it motion? Because if you bear witness to a story, you're sort of just standing silently beside somebody. If you're bearing it across, you animate it, you instigate it. And there's where the advocacy piece comes in. There you can say, for example, Lindsay's symptoms of cancer were ignored for so long because she didn't have a good relationship with her healthcare provider, because she, of the autism piece and this sort, there were communication issues and sensory issues. So that you can take a story of hers and say, gee, I wonder if other autistic people experiencing cancer also have had these same barriers to good outcomes. And so that's sort of moved me in two pieces, a work with Autism Canada and a self-advocacy guide, taking those interviews and making it into a very practical guide that other autistic cancer patients can use. So I'm working with Autism Canada, and also with AllCan Canada is interested in this. And taking that and possibly using ideas of patient navigation as well. And so it's taking a single person's story and seeing using the idea of parallel charting as well. The self-advocacy guide is sort of like creating your own parallel chart. And it begins with the question, what do you want your doctor to know about you that is not on your health chart? And then we have 10 sections that are, personnel, place, processing, and it allows an autistic patient and patients and their caregivers and their loved ones to answer these very specific questions and then bring it to a healthcare encounter and maybe say, for example, many autistic people don't maintain eye contact, which is considered like I'm listening to you, I'm maintaining eye contact. But let's say if you're autistic and you don't maintain eye contact and you're looking to the side. Well, if you're my doctor, you may think I'm stupid, I don't get it, I don't understand, but I'm just processing right now. But if I have an opportunity to, through our 77, which are way too many at this point, questions, to articulate that so that you as my doctor now know that, then you can say, okay, so she's listening, she's taking in this information about treatments or, prognosis, but I know that. And it may seem very simple, or sensory issues. For example, my sister if she's in a situation and there's a lot of noise going on around, she literally cannot take in any more information. Put her in a quiet room, you have a conversation with her, she can take in quite a lot of information. So if you give a patient, an autistic patient, an opportunity to narrate their own, to create their parallel chart, what do you need to know about me that isn't my co-occurring conditions, that isn't comorbidities, or these sorts of things? And then you, ideally, as my healthcare provider, can give me better care and ultimately effect for better outcomes. So this is sort of where I'm going from simply being a caregiver to my sister to making this hopefully be better for other autistic cancer patients. And there's a great deal of interest with that. So that's the autism piece of it. But then, of course, again, the narrative medicine bug, Kool-Aid, whatever it is that I've been bitten by, drunk in, is through a couple of people in the program as well. So there's a big new cancer center being built in Calgary, the Arthur Child. And we sort of would like to take a narrative medicine cloak and place it all over and put all things narrative infused in it. So we're in this great, let's dream up everything. Sounds great, let's do it all and create a whole new department while we're at it. Yeah, that's not going to happen. At the very least, perhaps we could do regular facilitated writing workshops like that Rhona Bloom offered, which I loved, and I now do for Ovarian Cancer Canada as well for cancer patients, and offer that regularly for the patients and caregivers and healthcare providers, and with the same sort of that understanding. So that's one piece of it. There is the physical space for it, and it's being opened next year. So there's sort of it's all very well funded, and they've got Brene Brown quotes about, owning your own story engraved on pillars. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to hop right on top of that, guys. I've got things to say. So it's sort of the stories are in the mix there. We've got the right ingredients and they just need someone to stir it up a little bit. And so that's one part of it. And the other thing we're looking at is the idea of actually affecting change to the medical record. And which we've got somebody on board who says, yeah, no, we can do that for sure. We just have to make sure that like perhaps 3 essential sentences or a 55-word mini autobiography and embedding it into like actually affecting the charting system. I don't know if it's possible. Like I said, this isn't the dream big, stupid stage. So, but you got to dream big, stupid before anything real happens. And possibly assigning a narrative navigator to all cancer patients to help them with the storytelling process and helping them whether they or their caregivers need facilitated writing workshops. And we sort of named, on my laptop, it's called RX Narrative. And that's what all things in there go. And there's some interesting work happening there. It's not completely out of the blue. It's just who's going to fund it, where is it going to happen, who's going to work for it, all these sorts of things. So that's sort of where that's at right now. And I'm meeting with them when I go to Calgary next week as well.
I mean, it sounds like so much of what you're doing, your own writing, the advocacy work you're doing, it brings the experiences of patients like your sisters to the forefront. It's kind of trying to center her story as well as some of the challenges that she's experienced in healthcare. But you're also really centering the experience of family members, caregivers, which, I think traditionally has been a bit left out of healthcare in terms of like what is their experience and how do we sort of include them in more meaningful ways? And how does all of this impact on them as well? I think there's more attention to that, but I think it's still in process.
Yeah. I read something the other day that was talking about caregivers as secondary patients because there's so much. And as the healthcare system gets crunched and crunched and crunched, so much care is put on to, and so much secondary care is put on to the families of the caregivers. And then when you have a patient that has a disability or some other, challenge, then, I call myself a medical Cyrano is sort of my job. I should have little cards that say medical Cyrano because I end up speaking I'm the Lindsay translator and then the medical person translator back and forth in between, which is an interesting job. It's an ethically fraught job. And I often wonder when I'm feeling like, am I the only person in the world doing this? And then I think, no, I can't be. I know I'm not the only person in the world doing this job. So I think offering facilitated writing workshops to caregivers and focusing on that is ultimately affects better care for patients themselves as well, because then the caregivers have more to give as well. So yeah, I think that's sort of like, well, focus on the patients and sort of bubble baths and chocolate cake for the caregivers and sort of hopefully you'll do okay. But I think we need to focus on the amount of actual care work that caregivers are carrying. And then when you've got people with difficult home lives or disabilities or all these sorts of things, they're carrying so much more.
Yeah, and without training and without support.
We don't know what the heck we're doing.
Yeah, suddenly being thrust into an alien environment,
Absolutely.
alien situation, and without that sense of what this story is, because it's apart from the situation you're describing of the patient whose situation is underrepresented, also the caregiver's story is mostly untold.
Mostly untold, yeah. Yeah.
Which is a way for me to get back to the writing, I guess, and think about what Karen mentioned too, your very interesting notion of, well, it's going to be bracketed. No, it's not going to be bracketed. It's going to be voiced. I'm curious about that as a process. I'm curious about how you see it developing, as well as it sounds like, how do you have time? How do you, how are you getting anything down? And many of our participants struggle with this as well. So what advice do you have for those experiencing and wanting to write?
Right. Well, again, something that I've learned and is just do it. Just simply do it. Do it in short amount of time, because I thought, well, I don't have time. I don't have time to sit down and do hours of writing and hours of editing because the phone's going to ring. It's going to be this, it's going to be that, it's going to be that. But I found that I give myself permission if I'm not sleeping to write, rather than lying in bed going, you better sleep, you better sleep. Oh no, you're going to need to sleep. You're going to need to sleep. And that's not helpful. Sometimes I feel it's almost like a self-exorcism. I need to get it out, and I feel better when I do. And it's a cathartic thing. And I have a notebook by my bed. I have little notebooks everywhere, little pencils everywhere, voice notes on my phone. And then when I have a minute or a sleepless night, I tend to just write. I have a file called Fall at the Foothills, which is the Foothills Hospital, but it's also a play on Lindsay falling between the cracks of all these care things. So I might actually use that as a title for something. So I just simply write short, bad, untranslated, unedited bits and allow them to be. And that's really hard for me. I don't work that way. My old self didn't work that way. But it's better than not. It feels like, I feel so funny because it's like, well, I'm offering this as a therapeutic tool to patients. Well, take your own medicine. Take your own medicine, do it yourself. So I just simply do it, and then I will get back to it. But the bracketing thing is interesting because when I transcribe the interviews with Lindsay, I transcribe my own words as well. And then I try to put even things like breaths and giggles and the way she uses her hands, or if she loses words, I try to put all of that stuff in there. The time when I try to write in emotion, times when we sort of get the giggles about something, or the times in which we both sort of tear up talking about something, write that in there. And I thought, when I was looking back at that the other day, not having transcribed the third of the interviews that I did just last month when I was in the hospice with her, and I thought, why am I so I transcribe it that way, but why wouldn't I actually, in my map project, why wouldn't I include that part of it? Why is that not important? So I've had to have a little think about that. About it seems to me that is also part of the story. I'm not sure
but
what
it
that
can be
looks
challenging,
like.
especially if you've had academic training, I think.
Yes.
That idea of like, you're not writing from the I, you're kind of somehow supposed to bracket who you are and what you bring to creative writing, to reflective writing, to narrative, which kind of encourages the I, either explicitly or implicitly. It's like you write from who you are, or what you've experienced, or what you can imagine. And so there's no need to bracket the I. So it's an interesting shift.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think there's a freedom in that. There's a real freedom in that. But I realize that, it's immoral and impossible for me to tell Lindsay's story as Lindsay. I can't speak for her. I can only speak with her, right? And so she wouldn't tell her story on her own. She wouldn't pick up a pen or laptop. She wouldn't be able to do that even without the cancer. Sitting there talking with me and asking, interviewing the questions, I can draw things out of her. And that is a storytelling process. And that is worth telling, because it's more telling about the relationship that happens and the cancer experience and sort of. So I'm not sure what to do about that, but you're right. It is turning off that other part of me, which is not a bad experience to do.
Part of the process as well, though, is you discover an I, or you compose an I as you write, and often the writing voice is it's quite distinct or quite different from your working voice or your efficient voice or your caregiving voice. Other things can come out, so that sort of discovery can be quite startling.
It is startling, and I think that it makes, because if I just simply removed myself and if I actually just deleted everything that I had said and wrote what Lindsay had said, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, and it would sound. I wouldn't do that because it would sound like I was taking on her voice. But if I write myself into it and I write it as a conversation, then and I talk about how the story was created and the context in which it was created and how we got there and where we went from there and what happened next and that sort of thing. And my own reflections are worthwhile, I think. And honestly, as Lindsay becomes more quiet as her cancer progresses, and it's not that I take over the storytelling because I don't want to do that, but my reflections on the whole situation are maybe worth doing. And I was thinking there was something Gillian Horton said. She said, I could not save her, but I did not fail her. And she said that in her book, We're All Perfectly Fine. And I read that book and I thought, I need that tattooed on my forehead. Because that is actually and she was talking about her own sister who died of brain cancer at a young age. And, but I thought, what an interesting thing to say. And I thought, because of course she's a medical doctor, right? And I'm not. But that's sort of a goal. It's like, I can't save her, but I'm not going to fail her. And in paying attention to that sort of storytelling nature with Gillian Horton does so well, that's a real inspiration, I think, for me to sort of keep that is that
That's so beautiful. Also very powerful.
It is very powerful.
Yeah. And also the idea of like when you're sort of doing say, I need to write that on my forehead, but I'm just thinking about, we just had a conversation about embodied practice and our own bodies and the bodies of patients in medicine and then how caregivers respond and how healthcare providers respond. So that's interesting to think about. I need to write that somewhere on my body, whether that's a metaphor or real. But that is a very interesting way of thinking about your support and care for your sister, but then also what you want to do with it. Because of course, Gillian Horton also turns it into narrative.
Yeah, of course.
That then he shares and it impacts on all of us and you as a reader.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're really impacted by that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing that Gillian Horton does, which I found very funny, is she narrates her own inner voice in the We Are All Perfectly Fine. She talks about, going to this, meditation retreat. And she's like, basically, hell no, this is garbage. This is so stupid. I'm not, blah, 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 And I really thought, I like the way that she pays attention to that other self, because she could have written, it's like, and here I am, and I'm showing up, and I'm, taking the teachings in and blah, blah. But no, she pays attention to that sort of inner struggle self. And I thought, I really admire the way that she does that. And that's worth doing as well. And so there is a way to do that in a way that's very readable as well. Ultimately, the product that you produce that becomes very readable.
And then it becomes much more complex and much more honest.
Much more vulnerable. Much more vulnerable, yeah.
I was going to, in a way, you've sort of started to answer this kind of as a final question. Often our participants, your colleagues, faced with a writing challenge, and they come to us and we say, well, what's out there? What have you read that's like this? So you could use as a model. And so it sounds like you have one in mind already that might be a help. So maybe what else do you have on your desk? What are you reading that you would recommend to someone venturing into these fields like you, or just what's good? What have you read over the break?
So this question terrified me when I saw this question, because I'm like, I'm not reading a damn thing these days. I have stopped reading other than medical stuff, which is beyond my pay grade, or a different kind of doctor. So I did read the Gillian Horton book, which I loved. And other than that, I have not given myself permission to read anymore. And I knew that is a New Year's resolution. I was just given, is Vincent Lam, The Ravine, the thrust upon me by my friends last night. And they're like, this is narrative medicine. Read it. It's on my list. Is it? So it's in my suitcase. No, that's my terrible confession. I have not read a damn thing recently, other than articles related to rare brain metastases of ovarian cancer, which I don't understand, and all these sorts of. I feel like reading has become this this luxury, which I don't allow myself. But even saying that out loud, I'm like, Paula, that's really dumb.
Well, it sounds to me like you've had to, by virtue of necessity in trying to advocate and support your sister navigate her illness, you've had to become immersed in the medical narrative, which is those articles and the chart and what's happening. And sometimes we need to do that, and it's a particular kind of narrative. And if we come to that without that kind of training, it can be very challenging to navigate a medical narrative. The language of medicine. And we're sort of, you talked about translation earlier, trying to also be a witness and a translator in a way for your sister's experience, but you're also trying to translate healthcare language and discourse as a caregiver, as a family member. So there's all these different narratives going on at the same time.
But we give you permission to read.
Thank you. I know I have to. I think read books is on my.
I think I'm required kind of by my union or profession.
That's right. I'm sorry. I have to read. I'm sorry. I'm busy. I have to read. So it's I have to exercise those muscles. So
we'll give you permission to read in a different sense as well. We'll give you permission to do a reading for us. As well. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you very much for the conversation. It's been fascinating. Thank you for your frankness with your experience as well. It's going to be revelatory to a lot of people.
Wonderful. Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out many other episodes. And if you're interested in learning more about narrative-based medicine, visit us online at narrativebasedmedicine.ca for more great content and to explore our upcoming offerings.